Okay, hi everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and get started now, and um, we'll wait for a couple panelists when they come. But thank you everyone for coming to our panel, Ensuring a People's Vaccine, a collaboration between Free the Vaccine and College Park Scholars. So that's really great. So quick background, Free the Vaccine. Oh, I'm a little ahead. But Free the Vaccine is a campaign between University's Ally for Essential Medicines and the Center for Artistic Activism. And we are an international campaign that works around from 29 countries with peoples from all walks of life and working, from our homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our main goal is to ensure equity and access to a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine for all, and health technologies that are related to that. So we use culture and creativity to kind of push our message forward and start conversations like this around the world. So this is just one of the many. Um, I posted a flyer or a program in the chat box. If you guys haven't gotten, we can send it again, but it basically has the bios for all the panelists here today. But quickly going over, we will have Dean Lushniak from the School of Public Health. We have Peter from Public Citizen, Matthew Rose from Health Gap, Lee Haynes, who is a campaign manager for Free the Vaccine, and then Dr. Chen from the University of Maryland School of Medicine Center of Vaccine Development and Global Health. So yeah, I will pass it off. Oh, I will now pass it off to Dr. Maring to get things started off.
Great, thank you, Tayaba. And nice to see everybody here. And I just wanted to just briefly say I'm Liz Maring. I'm the Associate Director of the Global Health Initiative in the School of Public Health and the Director of the Global Public Health Scholars Program. And just aware that people may not know about the Global Public Health Scholars Program, just was explaining it before, but it's a wonderful opportunity for high-performing high school students who get accepted to the University of Maryland to be part of a living and learning community. So grateful to College Park Scholars who's co-hosting this event today. So I was fortunate enough to meet Tayaba during her first week as a University of Maryland student, a student in Global Public Health Scholars. And so my advice, I want to move on to the panel, but I just want to give advice to students who are here to take opportunities to find mentors. As Tayaba is here, some of the panelists today are mentors for her. And also to pursue leadership development opportunities and then to be leaders. I see Dean Lushniak is here, and I'm sure he will tell you that we need public health leaders like Tayaba. So, with that, I'm going to start us off with the first question. And so to get at different perspectives and to hear from all of the panelists, the first question is that the Biden administration has made a commitment to vaccinate all adults in the US by May. What advice, and this is to all the panelists, what advice would you give to the Biden administration for its pandemic response? And what should be President Biden's top priority? And we thought we would start with Lee to share a little bit and then have Lee popcorn to one of the other panelists.
Sure, thank you for that. And thanks for organizing this and inviting me to be on this panel. I will be very transparent to say that I live in Belgium. And so any of the vaccine distribution things in the US, I'm following on the news and getting word from my mom and my sister for the most part. So just thinking about, what the Biden administration maybe can do to improve this pandemic response. I guess since my focus has very much been, around vaccine access, but also thinking about the disparate impact of the pandemic on particularly communities of color, but also, poor communities and folks who aren't able to take many of the measures. I think that one thing is to take into account everyone's different situations when it comes to access to information, or also being able to access information about the vaccine, but also where the vaccine is being distributed in communities, particularly rural communities where people might not have public transportation or definitely don't have public transportation, but don't have transportation to get to where the vaccine center is and things like that. And so I think that that's one thing to improve. And also thinking about the global response, I think it's important just to, realize that it's not a race. And because there's a lot of like, we're going to get all our people vaccinated by this time, and we're going to be done with the vaccinations. But it's, a global issue. And so I think the Biden administration, which I haven't heard them talk about at all, should consider their response in the global landscape and how, our hoarding of vaccines, or the US's hoarding of vaccines, is really, really detrimentally impacting responding to the pandemic for all of us.
Thank you. Do you want to popcorn it to someone else?
Or to Wilbur?
Sure. Wilbur Chen, thanks so much for inviting me, by the way. I'm a global health person as well, and I've been thinking along the same lines about the inequity. We've had a plan to develop the vaccines very quickly, but here in the US, we've not had a plan to implement these vaccines. And so that's kind of one of the holes that I'm hoping to see that the Biden administration will continue to push forward is we need funding to go to the local states and jurisdictions to be able to implement and deliver these vaccines, because we can develop them and have them sit on a shelf, but until they go into arms, they don't help anyone. And then on the global stage, I'm happy to see that the Biden administration has decided to join back into the WHO, which is a very important international and global forum for us to be engaged in. And, thinking about all of this, of course, the burden of disease for this pandemic is in LMIC countries. And, largely these vaccines are not affordable to LMIC. So it's only through large coalitions that some of these countries, where 2/3 of the population of the world are able to get any vaccine. So we only heard this week that that the first sub-Saharan African countries got their first doses of vaccine. Many of them were largely not able to even be involved with the clinical trials. South Africa was, but many of the other countries were not. So again, this is part of the inequities that Lee just was talking about as well, and it extends everywhere. So even if we are focused on the US response, if we eradicate COVID-19 in the US, it will always be reintroduced back into the US from outside because we have porous borders. Not saying I'm talking about immigrants, I'm talking about just our transportation, and travel is so easy that there's always going to be reintroduction of these types of things. And so looking forward to the next pandemic, whatever it is, emerging pathogen, re-emerging, or what have you, we're always going to be susceptible. We're not a country on an island where we can, be separated from the rest of the world. So that's kind of my thinking.
Thank you. You want to send it to someone else?
Let's see. How about Dean Luciak?
Hey,
Would you like to take it
Wilbur.
next?
Thanks a lot. It's great seeing you. And thank you all for being out there today and for the panelists here today. So yeah, let's be honest, we're all going to sort of have various answers along the same track. So if we're providing advice to the Biden administration, the reality is you got to get better at what you're doing here, right? That's the reality, because we have issues of, obviously disparities, right? The concept of health inequities, and the issue of populations that aren't getting easy access to the vaccine, right? And this goes across racial lines, this goes across socioeconomic lines. And the system has been set up thus far in most jurisdictions to make it easy for those who have, right? Who have things. I have a car, I can go to Six Flags, right? I have a computer, I may be able to register. So the reality is we have to do better. Now, part of this is a reflection, and it's not a cop out saying, well, the supply demand issue is part of the problem. But that's not enough to sort of just say that. It's that problem will be resolved with time, right? Huge amount of resources have been put in, i.e., the U.S. government has bought up a whole lot of the 3 vaccines that are available in the United States under emergency use authorization, right? The Pfizer, the Moderna, and the J&J. The J&J will be a game changer. Remind you, 1 dose and the refrigeration cooling scenarios are much different. What we have to do in the United States is really turn this into, as supplies go up, to really turn this into a 24/7 operation, right? It's got to, and has to infiltrate at all levels. It's got to get into the pharmacies in the neighborhoods. It has to get into doctors' offices. It has to get into churches and schools, community centers, right? Today, I had a talk with friends of mine at the Indian Health Center Service, right? Indian Health Service, who actually have a entity within Baltimore to serve the American Indian and Native American population, is now looking for vaccines. That's Baltimore, right? We don't think of Indian Health Service embedded in a big city, and in essence, there's a plea and a need for that. So it's got to get better on our home front. At the same time, we have to function globally on this. And the problem, of course, is, let's bring this up. We talked a few days ago on a similar theme with the group at Public Health Beyond Borders. Politically, you cannot send any of these 3 vaccines right now anywhere else but in the United States. That's the politics of the matter, right? It's disheartening to say, oh, it's a me first mentality. But no administration is actually going to be out there caught with the idea that, as our people are trying to find a vaccine, that somehow you're covering the rest of the world. I would love to not say that, right? I would love to say that we, in fact, encompass the globe and we understand that there are needs out there. Look at the political angle of this. How would that fly from a political perspective? I spent 28 years in federal service, and the goal of any political is to get reelected. That's their goal. Not to do the right thing. I hope no one's not in that. There's always a combination. You try to do the right thing and get reelected, but in essence, that's the struggle. In the meantime, what do we have that many other countries don't have? We have money, right? We have money, and that money needs to be filtered to groups like COVAX, if you've not seen this worldwide initiative, right? To be able to support the purchase of vaccines that are out there. Right? There are vaccines being developed worldwide. Right now, believe it or not, there's 150 vaccine candidates, right, Wilbur, in the chain. They're in all sorts of areas of development, some in animal studies, some in phase 1, 2, or 3s. But the reality is that our hope is that there's going to be more vaccines. What we're going to need is resources to be able to purchase those vaccines. So, Matthew.
So I just dropped a file in for people to look at. This is some work done by the Economist Intelligence Unit that looked at what vaccine allocation and introduction in countries will look like. It's a little bit older. We are actually seeing slightly faster in some countries, but not into meeting worldwide doses. I also say that as a world, we have administered 281 million doses of vaccine. You need to vaccinate 5 billion or upwards of people. So we've got to do more. We have to solve the supply side issue that's created somewhat by our own intellectual property laws. We can ask the Biden administration to broker more deals to out regional capacity. I'm going to let Peter, who is probably going to talk after me, really sink into that, because it's a game that and a place where they've been doing a lot of work on. We can relax some of our technology transfer laws. stop fighting things in the TRIPS Council that allows companies to start building their own vaccines based on the vaccines that are already on market, and saying, hey, we don't have to enforce all the intellectual property rights, but we have to stop the scarcity problem that was created by the developed world buying 80% of the vaccine supply and leaving the developing world with almost nothing. Even, the work that we did with the COVAX facility, which is a great effort, would only vaccinate 20% of the world's population, which still leaves us way underperforming. And on top of all of that, so I'm a super big nerd, and I read too many scientific journals, and I am actually very concerned about variants. The Brazilian variant P1 that we've seen, which is able to reinfect people who have already cleared COVID previously, the longer you allow vaccines to move around populations, the more likely you're going to see a variant or a variant that could be of concern to you. Remember, a virus's job is to keep reproducing and changing itself till it finds its perfect level and achieves some sort of homeostasis. Usually that takes about, up to thousands of years of human evolution to, coexist perfectly. But while it's constantly evolving, it could selectively evolve around pressure created by our vaccines. Now, some of our vaccine candidates are more easily able to be changed to adapt to these things. But until we get a hold over the global crisis, there will always be a risk. So even if we can get, my guess is that the American population, for the American adult population, will be pretty significantly vaccinated by August. Based on kind of where we're at now, where we're going, and the amount of supply that we'll have by the end of May. However, as it was said earlier, given the porous nature of our borders, Americans love to travel. We do a lot of global business. We are part of the international community. We will lose that travel exposes us to other things. But if we just help countries with the cash we have and the know-how to build up their own resources and infrastructure, we can overcome some of these crises and get rid of some of these scarcities, get rid of these issues. Everyone's like, oh my God, you can't give something to a low and middle country. They don't know how to do it. And I'm like, but they're actually really good at public health because they have to do more with less resources. So you give them the opportunity, you have the ability. The last thing I'll say before I throw to Peter is there is hope. I was on a call today with a research trial network I'm a part of, and all of our trial sites in other countries that were on that call, so Zimbabwe, Uganda, South Africa, all of those clinicians had gotten their at least one dose of a vaccine. Now, interestingly enough, half those people had gotten the Chinese vaccine, but we're in a fun times right now. But it's going to be about building enough supply for the world. And I think that Peter's probably the perfect person to talk about that.
Hi, Peter, take it away.
Has it been kicked to me then? Yeah, okay. I've really got to apologize. I was in a meeting that went long. Can I get just a moment's direction about what you guys would like and how long I should go?
Yes, so the first question, which I think Tayaba and I had predicted that this panel was going to be a very vivacious, vibrant panel that would just go in whatever direction that you would like. But the question that was asked was what advice you would give to the Biden administration for its pandemic response and what should be first priority. And we had thought about 2 minutes, but really go ahead and then we'll pivot to another question.
Sure. And the folks I know on this call are certainly vivacious, among other things. Great to be with you. Actually did just get off a call with some folks in the administration. I mean, I'm heartened, Matt, I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm heartened that the more conversations that we have, the more I feel like there are really serious career health professionals in positions of influence who are trying to figure out what can be done. A challenge is that by and large, they're not the top political decision makers, of course. And our country still has to wrestle with the political calculation about at what point are we willing to come out and say to our own people, like, yes, we need to work hard for the global supply shortfall. I mean, I think my sense is that many of our elected officials are very scared to talk about that while vaccines are still rolling out here in the United States. But of course, the problem is it takes time to stand up new manufacturing. And so we really have to be doing everything we can now. If we wait until it's palatable to talk about global access in the United States, it'll be awfully late to fuel the response. That said, I mean, I think there are organizations around the world that are fighting for this. So what needs to be done? We've proposed a $25 billion investment by the U.S. government, which we want Congress to allocate to stand up new vaccine production lines. This looks like retrofitting existing facilities. You take a vaccine production plant, you put a new room in it, you put new equipment in it to produce new technologies for COVID, the lead of which seems to be mRNA. We think that we're not at all wedded to mRNA. We think that you could probably get another 8 billion doses of mRNA vaccine in about a year if the US government were to lead and invest and help bring some other leading partners like World Bank and WHO and other wealthy countries, the G7 and so on, along. Now that would be enough to vaccinate half the world's population, which could shorten the pandemic by a year or more. It could save a couple $1 trillion on the global economy. It's not a simple thing to do. There's a lot of technical inputs required. There are challenges right now in finding all the raw materials, but I think our sense is that the US government has not yet thrown its full weight at this problem, and we still have a little bit experts in various agencies that are waiting for more clear permission, and we're trying to sort of hustle and make phone calls to various manufacturers instead of having real well-funded wholesale approach from the US government. So that's a long way of saying that the US government has the power to share technology, to build new capabilities, and to mobilize the essential political players and vaccine manufacturers around the world to teach the world to make safe and effective vaccines, to ensure that technology is transferred and shared, not held secret or monopolized at this moment, and to build resilience. So we're dealing not only with the current pandemic, but for the future. We think it requires both spending some money, but also just a real clear political decision that the Biden administration is going to come out and lead, that the United States is back with the global community, and we are going to do everything. We're going to move mountains, right? It's sort of like when the US government decides to move and sends that clear signal, vaccine makers come to the table, other potential suppliers come to the table. We're able to make regulatory adjustments as needed. We can get around the intellectual property barriers. So I think there is a macro political decision that needs to be made that recognizes that this is the moral crisis of our times. We're going to be remembered for this. We're going to be remembered for the vaccine apartheid that's unfolding around the world and the calamities I just heard Matthew Rose describing. It's if we think about what the past year of pandemic has meant for all of us, and I'll close with this for the moment, people in the United States, the isolation, challenges with employment, and trying to find healthcare, staying safe, losing loved ones. It's going to be much worse for countries that have considerably less resources, and in the context of a pandemic that could last for 3 or 4 years in the global South. So we simply have to do everything we can to mitigate that, to reduce the suffering, act now to shorten the pandemic down the road.
Thank you for that, Peter. Right now we can give a chance for someone to jump in on what Peter was talking about. If anyone wants to take that opportunity, go for it. Dr. Chen, yeah.
Yeah, Peter, this is my perspective, and it might be a little bit alternative to yours. And I don't think that I'm saying that mine is right and yours is wrong, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. Because as I've been working in the space of vaccine development, you achieve an efficiency in the cost of goods for when you make large-scale vaccines for LMICs in actually having these facilities such as Serum Institute of India and other places where you're doing it at low and middle income countries themselves, where Serum Institute basically makes more vaccines than all of our other first world vaccine companies at a much cheaper cost of goods, and they're making them for much of the world. So I agree that we need to do something, but I'm not sure if that means that we need to move the US companies and manufacture facilities into this situation, because you actually might achieve more efficiency by doing that tech transfer to these other companies internationally, where again, they can make these vaccines for much cheaper. I think also going back to you mentioned raw materials. As I understood, some of the bottlenecks were like simply the number of vials that are available. And that's why, being able to vial more vaccine per vial achieved us here in the US having a bigger supply. So I think that there are also some other barriers as well. I'm not saying my answer is right, but it's just a different way of looking at it. I think there are multiple facets to how we try to address this issue, and it's very complex. And so I'm just trying to elicit that as well. I worked on the Manafrivac, which again, was rolled out into sub-Saharan Africa, and we again were able to make a vaccine that typically costs $50, here in the U.S., and able to make it in India, and we're able to make it for pennies. And so again, to achieve that on a global scale for a pandemic like this means that we also need to think about how we can achieve those types of efficiencies as well. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, so it would, because I apologize if I missed your opening comment on this, but everything you just said now, I think I agree with, to be clear. And if it's not clear from our proposal or from my immediate comment, we're not talking just about United States production. I think, and our perspective evolves each day. We've had some, I think even just over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've had a series of conversations that show really impressive momentum toward regional manufacturing hubs by a lot of the major financial and health global institutions. So meaning decentralized vaccine manufacturing capacity around the world to be developed now and maintained active against future pandemics, which we think is a fantastic way to do this. And our own proposal, while our proposal is about moving the US government to put in what it can, not about trying to predetermine what should be produced or where. So, we had a good conversation with a manufacturer out of Bangladesh yesterday that has instant fill finish capacity. If they can do the job, that's great. I think it's better if we can get production closer to people who need it. And of course, if we can get it more affordably. But I'm not trying to make a claim that we sort of know the answer to that now. Our interest is immediately in mobilizing the political and financial resources to fuel the substantive and technical decisions that are going to be made to do this right for as many people around the world as possible.
Yeah, I think part of the issue also as we're having this discussion is, I'm total agreement. I mean, this has got to be regionalized. It's got to be looked at, try to bring the manufacturing facilities as close to the population that you want to serve as much as possible. And in essence, encompass the globe that way. Traditionally, we always look towards who's the coordinating body on this. And, it is great, as Wilbur had mentioned, that the World Health Organization is back in our lexicon, right? Because for a while there, it was not, as a nation. So it's good to see that. And yet, who has the real capability of doing this? The danger I'm seeing right now on the global scale is, I think, Peter, you brought up the term, vaccine apartheid, which is, part of the issue. The other thing is vaccine global influence or vaccine diplomacy that is being used worldwide right now, which is, okay, I'll give you some of mine, but now you need to be my friend, right? It's that sense of, of how the world functions. And I'm a little worried about how that's going to transpire as well, unless a coordinating public health oriented and health oriented coordinating body really does say, okay, here's where the needs are, right? The traditional model of WHO is everybody puts in their funds, richer nations more so than poor nations, to be able to cover the globe. That model's never really functioned quite efficiently. Is now the time that we're going to see that function?
I would say we need to see it because we're already seeing the vaccine diplomacy game. I mean, you can watch the vaccine allocation supply coming out of Russia and out of China going to very strategic partnerships. And the US saying, well, we want to be invested, but we're not going to talk to you for a while while we do some vaccine nationalism. You even see India, who is making, they are the world's vaccine producer, And even they were like, we're doing a lot for ourselves, but our regional neighbors, we're going to give you some for free. And like, I mean, in the current kind of mix we have, it's like, is anybody looking at, the middle of Africa? Is anybody looking at South America at all? And we're going to create these weird pockets, which will be a problem for everyone in the future. And I think that, Health Gap, we are interested in, getting as much vaccine possible out there, getting ways to doing tech transfer, whatever it can do, but also, in the words of Rahm Emanuel, never waste a crisis. So what are systems that we can put in place for, just vaccine supply we need for other vaccines that have to be made? I love, one of the things I love about MNR technology is that we can use this on other disease states. And so building that factory can have use after this initial kind of pandemic has gone past. And I'm interested in that use. I'm interested in some, I love J&J, strangely to say that, because their technology that they're using for their vaccine is also based on the same platform technology they're using for their HIV vaccine. So if I can get a bunch of people to be able to create supply for that vaccine, I can get a bunch of HIV vaccine, assuming it works. We'll know in like 3 years. But all those caveats aside, like, we have a bigger global health problem, and we know that our supply chains in global health got exposed by COVID in a lot of ways. And vaccine technologies is now like the way to think about how do we make some more equitable supply chains and shake up the system a little and maybe get the system to work as it's supposed to work. Who knows though?
Great. Tayaba, I'm going to skip around in our questions because I think this panel has, we could leave and you all could just keep going. It seems like you're got a lot to talk about. I'm going to ask a question about vaccine hesitancy and your thoughts on that. So the WHO views vaccine hesitancy as a top 10 global threat. And just, I'll put this out to everyone to answer, because it seems like you riff off of each other well. So what, from your perspective, can be done to address vaccine skepticism? And that's on the continuum from, from conspiracy theorists to people with legitimate reasons to mistrust vaccines and mistrust health providers. And so your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump in since I'm the only one who left myself off mute. I will say, so a lot of my work, I've been doing HIV vaccine work for a decade now. And if you want to talk about people's conspiracies about a vaccine, let me tell you some. But I think that we were always going to have, I think there's some layers of vaccine hesitancy that are overblown. Until you have a population where everyone has access, you don't know entirely who's not taking it, right? Like, if I can't just walk up and say, I'm going to get a vaccine and it's available, so we won't know. There are some real concerns about medical mistrust, especially in the US context, and actually just kind of everywhere. We've done some horrible things in the name of science that have left people with some real scars about what they think about vaccines. We have done things and we have not addressed some of those. And some of it is asking, whenever someone says they have a theory about why they won't take a vaccine, I ask them, well, where did you hear that fact from? And why do you believe it? And we have to do some real public education campaigns about like what vaccines have done. Vaccines are, in general, even outside of just, this, have been one of our most powerful public health tools. We, last year, in the middle of COVID, were able to declare the continent of Africa free of wild type polio because of vaccines. Like, vaccines are amazing. And I don't think we do enough work to tell people. In the US, we definitely don't, because we do most of our vaccination for children. But doing adult vaccinations takes more work. You have to get really down to why are people hesitating? Why won't they do it? What do they need to hear? And then listen to what they need to hear. And if you can give it, give it. There are people who are running all kinds of ads right now with all kinds of people getting the vaccine, saying they've got it. And I think that's amazing. And we have to do more of that kind of affirmative talk about public health. But I assume a lot of other folks have some thoughts, so I'll leave it there.
I'll pick up where Matthew left off. I've been doing vaccine hesitancy outreach work in my hometown from Belgium. I'm from Southeast Texas, and it's a very segregated community. And so I've been doing after talking to family members who are had friends who are older and high risk, and those folks saying they wouldn't take the vaccine for a variety of reasons, including medical racism, mistrust of the healthcare system, but also hearing random conspiracy theories. I was so surprised, like Matthew's saying, like now there are videos of healthcare workers getting the vaccine, but for a while there wasn't that at all, and I was so surprised that this response has been so piecemeal, and you would think, okay, so we're going to have a vaccine, so before we get the vaccine we should get people ready for it, and that just didn't happen. And so in talking to people in my hometown, it was very much, actually it wasn't, so it was very much just, I'm not sure, I'm afraid, I don't trust it. And so I started looking for the information. I mean, I'm a researcher, I do communication stuff. And so I'm like, I want to help get the information to these people. It didn't exist. And I was just like, where is the accessible information for my 70-year-old aunt to just sit down and understand what this vaccine is, how did it happen so fast, all of that. And it just didn't exist. And so there's a lot of talk about, there is a lot of talk about there being misinformation, disinformation, but there's just no good information out there. And it's a travesty. And it's a travesty also because I had to start creating some of that information, and I had to like make a video and do presentations, and I kind of hate being on video and recording myself, but it was really important because people were going to die if they didn't get the vaccine. And so I did outreach. And so I think part of the work that needs to be done to combat vaccine hesitancy is getting people information that is responsive to their skepticism, and also in a way that they can understand. And so I was kind of popping into, I host a Zoom church for a congregation back home. And so I was talking to folks there. And then I made a video for a church who does the Facebook church. It's just like a short 10-minute video, explaining that, that research on coronaviruses has been happening, or vaccine research has been going on for a long time. So it's not like the pandemic hit and they made a vaccine right quick and it's just going to start jabbing us with it. Like, that's not what happened. And so one of the feedbacks that I got from a really nice lady, she said, thank you so much, because it was all just so confusing. I mean, she's, she gets the flu shot and has gotten other things. She's like, but this I just didn't understand. And it was like, one shot or two shots, and where did it come from? And so so I think for me, it's really just as simple as getting good, easy to understand information out there for people who just have questions. And maybe the same thing can combat some conspiracy theories, but sometimes those are just, something else. But yeah.
Yeah, let me sort of tap onto Leah here in that, it is that combination, right? We're looking at health communication plus health literacy, right? We can't give up on those. Those are very distinct features, plus outreach. And outreach needs to be well thought out. And ultimately, outreach needs to be in any form that works, right? It's not across the board that there's only one type of, doing a PSA on a PBS station, only gets to certain people, right? You have to realize that we have a whole cross section, and ultimately it is that trusted soul, right? What I found is, just doing, even last night, we did a town hall meeting sponsored by assembly people and senators from the state of Maryland for Prince George's, Anne Arundel, Montgomery County last night. And the whole idea of having the political forces there, plus a few medical forces to answer directly questions, you can almost feel through the Zoom that easing of attention, of the tension that exists out there. We're a setup here for failure, right? And I never accept failure in times of crisis like this. And by the way, Matthew, that quote that you gave was actually not quite Rahm Emanuel. He kind of stole it, but it was Winston Churchill, right? Who was the original sort of never, take advantage of a crisis. We have to take advantage of crisis to actually get the word out. It's a setup for disaster. Why? I spent 6 years of my career running the office that is in charge of emergency use authorizations at the Food and Drug Administration. What a bad term, right? Emergency use authorization. It means emergency, which means, oh my God, you've already done something out of the ordinary. It's an authorization, not a licensure and not a approval. I think it's necessary to be purely transparent on this, but already we're kind of behind the curve on this. You're right. COVID, coronavirus research has been going on for a long time. Wilbur and his group has been working this from various angles. The mRNA is not necessarily new technology. It's just being put on. So it's not that thing started 12 months ago, but the reality also is we have to get the information out, right? The toughest group is the first group who are going through the clinical trials. They are all volunteers. And then who's next? It's the first person in line on the first day after the EUA was issued, right? Because you're number one of an unknown. The more people that we have, the more that we actually transparently share information about further information on effectiveness, further information on adverse events, right? And bring it so that people understand it, right? The real influencers, as I'm seeing right now, is the next door neighbor or the family member who says, yeah, I got it. And, it hurt for a few days, but now I feel like I'm protected and I believe them. So follow me, right? It's going to have to hone into that very concrete level.
I can jump right on top of that and say that that's absolutely right. What I've seen is that it really takes, local people in the community that are trusted to be able to talk about these vaccines. Because I can come into a community and talk as an expert and whatever, and throw around a lot of data, but at the end of the day, I'm not really necessarily the recognized face or the trusted person. So I think that, again, we have to have people who are local leaders and people who are in the community that are trusted. And sometimes it's just that neighborhood, the old lady down the street that everyone knows has lived here for 20 years and everyone goes to her for advice on, what to do this or that. And, it can be, of course, local religious leaders or others as well. I think many of you know Dr. Stephen Thomas working through the barbershops. Again, that is, again, a central point where in the community, they're trusted people. So, you talk to them and you trust their advice. So you give them the tools to be able to talk about this. One thing we didn't talk about yet, well, maybe we touched upon it earlier, was kind of the whole idea in vaccine hesitancy. Yes, there's fear, distrust, misinformation, but part of the reason why some people don't get vaccinated is because of access. So we can bring that up again. It could be that technology, maybe it's lack of transportation. It could be due to time constraints. Again, some of our vaccine clinics are only banker's hours. Well, a lot of our essential workers, frontline workers, the people who are at highest risk really because of their occupations really don't have the choice of those times. So again, we have to have it 24/7, like Dean Lushniak said, and also language issues. So there are a lot of things that we need to surmount. And again, we need to build in systems to be able to deploy these vaccines, but also to message out these vaccines as well. It should be from local community people who are trusted by the local community members. So I think I'll just leave it there.
I'm going to pop in real fast to say, all of you who are on this call, you have local communities. You're learning things that you could talk to them about and see where they're at with their vaccination ideas. Just putting that out there.
Alrighty, cool. With that, I think we're gonna move into our last question before we move into a Q&A. So I just wanted to remind everyone again that if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat box. We already have a couple of questions come in, so that's really great. You can either send them to me or Reva or Dr. Maring, and we can make sure that your question is answered later on. So I just kind of wanted to pose this question to everyone on the panel. So, as we start to see this light at the end of the tunnel coming into view, in terms of the next pandemic, what are or what will be, some of our lessons learned, in preparation for the next one? What do we need to make sure we know? So, take it away, anyone.
I'll start as as someone who has seen multiple crises, right, in my career path, just in this century alone, World Trade Center responder, anthrax responder, Hurricane Katrina, H1N1, and I finished off my time as an officer in the Public Health Service Commission Corps, spending 3 months in Liberia dealing with Ebola. That being said, my big fear is we walk away exactly what we've done in the past, which is, oh my God, look at what we've learned. Look at what we need to do to get better. We have reports written, committees sitting down, and that all goes out and it's filed ultimately, or things are done for a year or 2 or 3. And then at year number 4 or 5, the traditional pattern is we forget. Policymakers have moved on, politicians have moved on, and all of a sudden we find other priorities. I think the key feature overall, and I'm speaking as a public health person now, is that we can't just be reactionary to each and every crisis that exists out there. Part of the dilemma from a public health angle that we've ended up having right now is that we do not support any public health infrastructure, right? And people oftentimes misinterpret public health. The only time they see it in the news is when we're in the midst of crisis, and then we're only playing catch up. Guess what? Each and every day, without the pandemic, there's a public health crisis going on. We just aren't in the news, right? We still have aspects of that, that affect the health of our society to a large extreme. You can just name them, right? An old-fashioned one, but I'm kind of old-fashioned, and again, my time in the office of the Surgeon General made me more passionate about this. Guess what? Tobacco still kills 460,000 people each and every year in our country, right? That's a work in progress. We have not, conquered that as yet. You talk about substance abuse, opioids, right? You talk about HIV that Matt has worked on. You talk about vaccine preventable diseases, cancer prevention, right? We can list all this. This is public health work each and every day. And I think what we have to do is acknowledge, is health a national priority or not? And to this point in time, it's really been thought of as optional. It's for only those who can afford it. And I'm not talking about healthcare. I'm talking health, World Health Organization definition, complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, right? The reality is we have to dedicate ourselves. The result of this needs, we have to refocus on health, on prevention, on public health. Then when the next pandemic comes, Tayyiba, is what? What's going to happen is then we're ready, right? We can easily take those forces working on opioids and say, okay, for the next few months, you are now reassigned to deal with this crisis. Not to say that problem is solved, but at least we have a ready workforce to go. And it goes beyond the workforce. It's a mentality. Is health a national priority?
I have a great dovetail story off that, because I think that what we have to learn is that you have to make strategic investments in public health infrastructure everywhere. One of the countries that has done the best to deal with the COVID crisis is Senegal. Senegal was a very poor country, but Senegal had Ebola rip through it. And Senegal learned we have to make investments and we have to support good public health response, good health communications. We have to make sure people understand what's going on with health. And they have done fairly well in COVID compared to a number of other countries. You see it all the time is big new public health outbreak, something happens, we stop talking. The HIV community, we talked about Scotts County in Indiana. They went from 6 cases to 250 cases. Same type of outbreak is happening right now in West Virginia. But these things fall out of fashion. We have to not keep chasing the new and sexy and do the fun and boring. Like sometimes you gotta just build and be happy with that. And that build stuff is good. One of the best things and hardest things about working in public health is that when you are doing your job really well, nobody's supposed to be talking about you because there isn't lead in the water. People aren't getting asthma. Cancer rates aren't going up. And when people aren't talking about you, the political side is, well, you're not a problem then. So we can cut from here and move some here. And no one's gonna notice. And we can't keep doing that. People who responded and had better public health systems handle this crisis a lot better. And not just the island people. So, sure, South Korea does well because, well, you can't get to them. Japan did well, Australia did well, but Vietnam also, great job. Really amazing video about washing hands, which was public health in their country. And those types of things matter. And that's what we've got to keep going. Like, you've got to keep supporting the backbone, and you can't just grind it down all the time and think it's going to be there when you need it for the next emergency.
I'll just quickly say that because I think my response is just along the same lines, and I think what most of us know, but what we, I guess, have to relearn, and especially those with the power to make decisions have to understand, is who we can't depend on in these things, which is very often the private sector and private companies who are profiting off of these things, profiting off of the medicines, vaccines. I don't want to be too morbid and say profiting off of people's death, but that's kind of what it feels like, death and misery. And so I think that we need to learn, like Boris and Matthew have just said, that we need to invest. We need to make the right investments, and so we need to invest in our public health systems. In the U.S. because we don't really have one, but everywhere, and also like what legal structures do we need to respond appropriately? And I think that kind of a little bit goes to thinking of the issue at the WTO with patent monopolies. And, there was the Doha Declaration, which was very beautiful to say that, we should respond to public health emergencies through the legal mechanisms of the WTO. But then, when it comes down to it, there's months of negotiation, and but we can depend on the generosity of pharmaceutical companies to donate their things, and so so I think that that for me, it's this is just like a really, really powerful showing that we really need to have strong public health systems rather than depending on the private sector like we do.
I'll say that, Taiwan was one of those remarkable instances where they had no cases for many months, 0 cases. And it was before vaccines came along, and they weren't depending on any therapies or anything else from kind of the private sector or industry. It was plain old NPI and good public health. And they had the infrastructure in place, and they basically were scared stiff because of SARS in 2002, that they revamped their entire public health infrastructure and had it ready and available such that when COVID came along, they were just ready to respond in that way. And that's why it was so remarkable. They also have an island country population that is highly compliant with, I think, a government that also has been consistent with their public health messaging. And I think that that's important, of course, to have a unified response at all levels as well. So, I think that would be an important part. I think going back to, some of the things that lessons learned, I think definitely we have to build up public health, but there are other things that are, as part of the medical systems that I've been involved with, the University of Maryland medical systems, we have multiple different system hospitals, for which we were able to, within a short period of time, have an informatic structure and everything else that was able to look at all the hospitals simultaneously to understand how we could load and decant certain hospitals with either resources, personnel resources, or ventilators, or other things like masks and whatever else, and make sure that each hospital was taken care of. And if any one hospital was overwhelmed, we were able to surge in capacity and provide it either by taking the patients out of that hospital to another one, or providing them with personnel to surge into that hospital. Again, doing it flexibly. But looking to the future, we need to look beyond just medical systems standing for themselves. We need to have multiple medical systems within regions, and perhaps at some point nationally, in a way that they can function so that they could also work together, so that no one hospital or medical system is standing alone, that we can also have a way to offload. We saw some of that where, again, hospitals in Texas were pleading, and then they had to, fly some patients over to Wyoming or other places, but those were ad hoc. Those were not thought of in advance, and we have to have advanced infrastructure to do that, and that requires dual use authorizations and multiple, not just dual, but multiple authorizations where, again, all of these systems have to negotiate with each other and agree on. But that's the only way that we can respond as medical personnel in the care of something that is not just in the sphere.
Dr. Chen, maybe we'll come back to your last thought, where you're freezing up a little bit. Peter, did you want to say anything?
I can add something really briefly. I think I'm very grateful to be on this extremely knowledgeable panel. I think I'd add that the pandemic preparedness has been, I'm speaking somewhat as an outsider to it, but that's kind of the point. I mean, my impression has been that pandemic preparedness till now has been entirely too much of a niche field. And potentially COVID will change that if, in a sense, we're lucky. The discussions that we're sitting in on, I think, make clear that health bodies are doing what they can to wake governments around the world up to the need to have standing capacity in health systems everywhere to respond. And the part I'm focused on deals primarily with vaccine production, but it applies to all the different aspects of pandemic response. In a sense, the pandemic wasn't a total surprise, right? We've had coronaviruses and we've known that a larger pandemic was coming, but this is the sort of event that can wake the world up to how significant the danger is. In a sense, perhaps we were fortunate that this virus is not more deadly. And so I think that we will see more investments in local and regional capacities. And I think we all need to encourage that as much as we can. Essentially, that from here on, pandemic preparedness is a priority of all people, and health system readiness is a priority of all people, and a main function of what governments and international organizations, local, national, international, should be doing, what we all should be doing together. Hopefully we're going to get there. And I think, and just to be a little more specific about, these sort of discussions around mRNA really seem to be heading in that direction, but I'm hopeful it won't be exclusively that.
I think, thank you, Peter, for speaking. Dr. Chen, did you want to finish off your last thought before you kind of broke away?
Yeah, I didn't realize that I broke off. You'll have to inform me where I left off.
I would just go with whatever you feel is best and give us a 1 or 2 liner to end us off.
Well, I think a lot of it has been said in multiple different ways, and I just agree with all the panelists, what they've been saying so far. There are a lot of different directions where we can take lessons learned, but if they just basically end up bound in a book and on a shelf collecting dust and not in action, I think, when we're not in a pandemic, we can be using these broad-based platform approaches, whether they be technology for developing vaccines, and that's how we got the mRNA-based vaccines and vectored vaccines, because we've been using them for Ebola, for Zika, and for other things. So it's a broad platform. But again, all of these other things that we're doing in public health can be broad platforms as well, in which we can use them to respond to the opioid crisis. We can use it to respond to maybe local events like an algal bloom in the Chesapeake Bay or other things, foodborne illnesses that come and go within the US. These are systems that we can be using, and then we can have them readily pivot to a pandemic when they happen. So, again, we have to have the eagerness and willingness, the political will, the funding, and again, that's kind of my advice.
Alrighty, thank you, Dr. Chen, and thank you to all the panelists for coming out today, especially on a Friday. So we don't want to keep you too much longer, but I just wanted to say thank you again. And so just really quickly before everyone leaves, I just wanted to direct people who are interested in more of the work that Free the Vaccine does. We would love you to check out our exhibit with pieces from all around the world with students and activists, researchers alike, targeting different targets at their respective universities or research institutions. So if you'd like to learn more about that or campaign work, I would definitely forward you to go here. And as well as that, thank you for everyone for coming. I also dropped the program again in the chat box. So if you want to reach out to UAEM here at the University of Maryland to get further involved, or if you want to reach out to any of the other panelists or scholars or People's Vaccine, etc., just let us know and we can help facilitate that. But thank you everyone for coming. Yeah. Alrighty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists and Tayaba and scholars. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much, everyone. Hope everyone has a good weekend.
Great. Thank you all.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your work.
Thank you.